everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are once again going to be talking about pet play, but a particular subtype of pet play I've never covered on my channel before. Historically, I have made lots of content talking about things like how to be a human pony and kitten play, and my personal favorite, puppy play. But there's one very popular type of pet play I've never covered before, and it's conspicuously absent from my channel. And that would be cow play, aka cow roleplay, aka being a human cow, aka HuCow for short. There's lots of terms for this particular kink. And frankly, this was something I wasn't very aware of in my kink journey. I knew about it, but didn't really have any concrete information on it. And the reason for why that is because it was around, but it was a lot more separate. It was usually in special interest groups on FetLife and separate forums and lots of different roleplay spaces online from what I understand now, but it wasn't quite an integral part of the broader BDSM landscape in terms of community spaces. But in the last couple of years, it has exploded in popularity, and I keep meeting people that do some form of cow roleplay. So clearly, it is right up there these days with some of the very most popular forms of pet play. I would say it's more on the level of like maybe being a bunny or a fox, rather than being a kitten or a puppy, if I really had to say. But the stock is increasing. Invest now. And that is why we were making this video, because I really think it's going to keep gaining popularity. And I want to talk about why it is so popular, why so many people are adopting it as a form of roleplay they're engaging in. I want to talk about everything you want to know about being a HuCow, basically, how you can get started doing it, different activities that are common within cow roleplay, and just generally covering this kink. So if that sounds good to you, you're in the right place. And I want to start off, as we normally do here, just going over a very brief definition. Like I was saying, there are a million different ways to refer to this particular kink, but no matter what way you phrase it, it basically all boils down to the same thing. And that would be, this is a form of BDSM play where at least one participant is taking on the role of a cow. Oftentimes, this involves some element of being forced or transformed into a cow role, oftentimes by a dominant partner. That doesn't have to be the case. You can do cow roleplay like basically any other kind of roleplay without a partner, without a dominant. You can do it with a group of friends if you want to, but for that forced aspect, having a dominant partner compel you to take on the role of a cow for their own purposes is something that is more common, especially compared to a lot of other more modern iterations of various forms of pet play, like with being a puppy or with being a kitten. With those forms of pet play, it's much more likely that you will see people describe it as a form of self-expression. It's about letting out some inner true part of who you are, or a way of exploring a certain aesthetic, or about having fun and relaxing. It's a lot more low-key in a lot of ways. And people will usually say, oh, I'm into this kind of pet play because it speaks to something that's like true to who I am inside that I am letting out. That is quite different from being compelled into a role by an external force. You know, like when you are engaging in pet play that a lot of people engage in, usually it'll look like, oh, I'm playing around, I'm like kind of aware that I am being a Shetland pony or a dog, but we're all gonna pretend that I actually am one and that I kind of came into the scene being that animal, even if we're all aware here that I'm actually human. You know, there's a difference between I am being forced or coerced or compelled into acting out the role of being a dog in a family unit or in some kind of structure or hierarchy versus, you know, I'm dog, which is much more the way that I do it, to be frank, but any way you do it is valid. But what I find very interesting is this concept of being forced into the role makes it a lot more like historical pony play. And pony play is really, from what I can tell, at least historically, one of the earliest forms of pet play, and so it has a very particular legacy to it. A lot of the very early works talking about pony play focus on it being something where you're taking an ordinary person, putting them in a new scenario where they have to adapt and become a pony or take on the role of a pony. And usually there's some kind of resistance in there, like, oh, I don't want to give in, or oh no, it like feels too good and I'm losing myself, or I really don't want to be this and they're making me, and it's like a triumph of the wills and like somebody trying to literally dominate over somebody else in the most traditional sense of the word dominate, like outside of a BDSM context. And so that flavors a lot of pony play that is certainly carried through in the more modern version. Of course, with any form of pet play, there's so much variety in there that there can be a force aspect to kitten play or puppy play as well. It just tends to be more common with different types of role play compared to others. But cowplay retains a lot of this. I think maybe partly because it's been so separate and been a lot more of a fantasy thing versus being a real life kink that people engaged in. Like, it was much more common to see it done on forums in groups versus out at parties, for example. But regardless, this theme of being flung into a new scenario, trying to resist giving into that new role you've been given, and then eventually succumbing to it, that's been around for a long time. You can find this in the Anne Rice Sleeping Beauty trilogy, and that was certainly not the first iteration, and that came out in the mid-80s, so it's been around for a hot minute. But if you are someone that is familiar at all with the kink world, or if you have kinks like this for yourself, you've probably picked up on a few themes in what I've been describing so far. Modern pet play is oftentimes framed as being about relaxation and pleasure, whereas forced animal role play or forced pet play is much more about being humbled, humiliated, or about being compelled into being submissive. It's not that you come into the scene already being submissive, already being that thing. You are made and molded into that thing by a dominant partner. That is very different than just showing up and being like, I want to be a puppy because it's fun. Again, both iterations, both versions, totally valid, but quite different mental perspectives, at least for most people. A dominant treating you like raw clay and transforming you can be very powerful mentally for a want to be submissive. You might have a dominant that simply wants to make you that thing to suit their own desires. And it could be because they're trying to punish you or teach you a lesson because you've done something wrong. It might be because you can offer them something useful in your new state. Or it might just be because it makes them laugh and it's done for their own perverse pleasure just to see you tromp around on the floor on all fours, because don't discount that as a potential motivation. If you've got more of a bratty or a little bit more of a strong-willed streak, even if not maybe bratty itself, I think being made into an animal gives you an opportunity to play around with that resistance and that bratty nature and eventually be overcome. So, if you want to do that, you definitely can, and it can certainly be a compelling role play for people that maybe don't necessarily like other types of pet play, because maybe this speaks to something that's quite different and it's like, oh, I can resist and be overcome, be made to be that thing. Oh, that's definitely my kink. Some people also just like this role play because they like the process of being broken. They like that idea of being taken and wild and being able to be molded into anything and then being forced into that mold by a partner. People just like doing that over and over and over and over again, and that's like the scene they always keep going back to, or the fantasy they always keep going back to. There's one other big aspect of being a cow that I've not talked about that once again connects it to pony play, and that would be service, being able to offer something to someone else. A lot of people love pony play because they like people being able to ride them, like being able to carry people around, they like being able to like push things and like be useful. And cowplay can offer you that exact same opportunity. More or less, obviously, right? Like, we kind of forget here in the Western world because we don't generally interface with livestock on a regular basis, but bovines have been very important to a lot of very basic things we take for granted. You can use cows to pull carts, to carry people. You can ride them kind of like a horse. They were very important for all different types of farm labor. And I don't think this is something that people would expect from cow roleplay, but this offers you an opportunity to connect masculinity with service submission, which to a lot of people are diametrically opposed. You can be that strong helper around the house. You don't have to be just like a simpering worm on the floor who's built like a twig. You can be that big, strong, masculine figure and also not be in power in a hierarchy. I love opportunities where we get to subvert expectations about masculinity and submission, so I wanted to highlight that one. But physical labor is not the only kind of service you can offer while engaging in this kind of role play. I have to be careful about how I talk about this on YouTube because they don't like a lot of the words that I'm about to try and attempt to say, so bear with me here. I'm going to try to be as clear as I possibly can while also not like freaking out the censors. So I haven't talked about this yet, but I need to be clear about something, and that's the fact that a lot of HuCow content, a lot of people's interest in being a HuCow comes from fettuccine content, to be frank with you. And one aspect of this that's very popular is lactation. From what I've seen for people who make content, for people that enjoy this kink, the lactation is a very, very big part of what it means to be a HuCow. And most people in the kink community, I think, would probably first associate lactation with like adult nursing relationships and maybe ABDL to a certain degree, but it's something you can also do within cow roleplay. And when you think about how that could be appealing, it might seem kind of off at first, but when you really think about it, a lot of the key themes of cow roleplay involve humility and submission and offering something in service, and lactation kind of offers a way to do all of that and more. For some, this is a way to get to some pretty deep degradation, where they are being reduced down to a very base biological function, as well as the only thing that really matters about them. For other people, it's about being elevated to provide this level of service, literally giving an aspect of their body, something they've made in themselves, to someone else for their own sustenance. That's pretty powerful stuff in DS. And there can also be this sort of bimbo-like, intellect-centric form of humiliation to it too, where it's like you're being made into a cow and you are so worthless and so unintelligent. The only thing you are good for is something you make with your body, because nothing else about you matters at all. And there is sort of a strange relief in that the only thing that matters about you, the only job you have, is that one thing. You're not expected to do anything else because you're not good enough to do anything else. And a lot of people, that's a better option than being expected to spin the 25 plates you have to be spinning all the time to keep up with adulthood. So that can offer a little bit of interesting and maybe unexpected escapism and relaxation. And of course, objectification goes right along with a lot of these feelings. According to ethicist Rebecca Kukla, who was interviewed by Vice about this subject, quote, "But as Kukla rightly points out, cows aren't only good for milk production. They are, quote, the ultimate animals produced specifically for consumption, bred into highly artificial-looking consumer products. In HuCow, the cow woman is simulating an object produced specifically to be consumed by her partner." I'm actually picking up a bit of vor subtext from that one, or just text, to be honest with you. I didn't really think about that the first time I read it, but it's pretty obvious now, and I can definitely see that connection and how you might want to incorporate that in with your cow play. But I also want to talk about how cow roleplay isn't just about being a cow, that is, female cattle. You can also be male cattle. You can be a bull, for example, or be an ox as well, as I've already kind of talked about a little bit, but I want to talk about it more here because this is another word that YouTube doesn't like, so, okay. If you have a breading kink, that is a common entry point into this particular form of roleplay. If you really like breadcrumbs, makes sense to go here. That's how a lot of people get into it, and especially if, for you, kink is something that's more a bedroom activity. Hello, being a strong, powerful animal that is overwhelmed by hormonal urges yeah, I can see the connection there. And have you seen how popular ABOFIC is? Have you seen how popular Primal Play is these days? It's going to be something that people are going to enjoy playing around with. And what I like about this is you can really play it from either side of the slash. You can be a submissive male cattle that is being compelled by their hormones, but also being taken advantage of by their dominant partner, being exploited in that way. You know, the other kind of milking, if you know what I mean, if you've seen that one very famous Jordan Peterson tweet, perhaps you know what I'm talking about. So there's that aspect of it where you are being taken and controlled because you are in fact still cattle, but you can also be the powerful animal that cannot be controlled, that is overwhelming and voracious and cannot be stopped, and that's also appealing for a lot of pretty obvious reasons. Something I don't think I've covered before in my channel is the fact that PIV can be controversial in male sub, female dominant spaces. Like, a lot of male subs either would never dream of having PIV or they would never want it with their dominant female partner. But if you are a submissive man that is in a sexual relationship with their female dominant partner, this allows you a way to get to that place in your scenes or in your relationship, give you a context for where you can be submissive, but still have that particular kind of physical intimacy and connection. And again, I just really love when we get different ways to subvert expectations and play with things that normally would be like off limits or like, oh no, no male submissive would ever do blank. Like, you can basically do whatever you want as long as it's consensual, but it's nice having certain narrative frameworks to make it make more sense mentally. You can even get really out there and take inspiration from things like bullfights or mechanical bulls, and that gives you a way to play around with things like rough body play or wrestling or takedown and capture, even bratting, and that works from either side of the slash. And something else I should be sure to mention here as well is regardless of whether or not you're playing as a cow or a bull or whatever other form of cow play you're doing, heavy bondage is also very popular in cow play because you can have things like yokes and stalls and like different presses, and there's a lot of containment devices in animal husbandry, as it turns out, and they are just begging to be kinkified. So naturally a lot of people are drawn into this form of role play because it gives them a way to use their various unusual torture and or containment devices. Sadomasochism, both physical and mental, big thing in cow play as well. And you might be thinking at this point, and you forgive me for the pun here, we have gone very far afield from what is typical for pet play, at least in a lot of conversations about it. Are we sure this is still pet play? Like, why would we call it pet play? And I want to revisit this because I do think about it as a form of pet play, but not everyone does. And the more complicated answer to is this a form of pet play or not is like, it depends on the person who's doing it. Some people are certainly going to embrace this as a form of pet play because you can be a pet cow. You can be loved and doted on and included and thought about in that way. For some people, though, thinking about it as a form of pet play would kind of ruin the experience, especially if they're more focused on the humiliation, being objectified, those aspects of it. They don't want to be thought of as being a pet. They don't want to be emotionally close during the scene. They like having that very deep, dark chasm between them and their human captors slash ranchers slash keepers slash whatever other term they're happening to use. They like knowing that they are sometimes literally left out in the cold and that they are not thought of as being important or worthy of love, and they're not cared for. That lack of tenderness and regard is what makes the role play appealing for them. So it really depends on the people involved. I think it depends on the mindset you're going into it with, but it is certainly a form of animal role play at the very least, even if not necessarily pet play, depending on how you're doing it. And I do want to say here that there is a form of cow roleplay that is, and I say this affectionately, a more social media-fied version of it that's kind of taken a lot more aesthetic cues from other more modern versions of pet play like puppy play, like kitten play, where it's not about all of the big trappings and the humiliation, and it's not about being put in a garage that has concrete floors and getting shackled up to something and left with a bunch of bales of hay and then being left there to sleep or whatever. It's a lot more warm and fuzzy, even kind of cutesy. And you have people that will take almost sort of like a moe approach to it, where it's kind of like cutesy anime cowgirl energy to it, where there's a lot of emphasis on costuming, and it's much more, I would say, praise kink-like in a lot of ways, where you have lots of verbal affirmations, you have physical affection, you have petting, getting treats, being fed apples by hand, getting to romp around in the grass, and just generally having it be a lot more positive. You can certainly include other elements with that. You can certainly have things like milking machines or stocks or other forms of restraints too, but if those are there, they tend to be quite a bit lighter. Or it can even be enjoyable because you have that juxtaposition of the very harsh traditional BDSM with the soft, fluffy costuming. Trust me, I know some people that dress very cute in all pink, and they do some truly messed up things in the kink scene. So oftentimes it can even be that you like having that warm fuzziness because it makes the dark even darker. That contrast really adds an extra layer to it. And just to go back and give a quick example of how you can play with those more common elements to cowplay, but do them in a lighter way, you can infuse them with a little bit of praise kink, right? Have a little bit of a praise kink element to it, where it's much more like, oh no, don't look at me, I'm flustered, I shouldn't be enjoying this, but I am. No, stop calling me a good cow. No, stop it, it's too much. Versus the more traditional form, which would be more like, I'm a cow and I'm worthless, this is the only thing I'm good for, this is my fate, this is the only thing I deserve, I will be treated like this forever. It's much more final. It's much more definitive in its statements. It's much more focused on that tearing down and becoming something else versus it being a lighter, more positive thing. But once again, different ways to play with it. You can certainly do a mix of all of the above if you want to, and it's all totally good. Kink is a very customizable experience. And speaking of customizable experiences, let's talk very briefly now about how you can get started doing this kind of role play, because clearly not all of us have concrete, bare garages we can just put people in and toss them in with a bale of hay and leash them to something and then have at it. Not all of us can start there, but that might be if you have a space like that. I really think costuming is a great tool for cowplay. You will certainly see very fancy, very expensive, purpose-made bodysuits for this, but I've actually found there's cute Halloween costumes that make for pretty good cowplay outfits. They're better than a lot of other Halloween costumes, and I normally don't recommend using Halloween costumes for kink as an entry point, but I discovered while editing this video that cow print is having a little bit of a mainstream fashion moment alongside denim and general rodeo cowgirl vibes, and I am completely here for it. I was able to find everything from cow print Doc Martens to Y2K fashion to 1950s vintage reproduction to bustiers to clubwear. So no matter what your personal aesthetic is, you can find something that'll work for cow roleplay. You don't have to break the bank for it either. I found a lot of this secondhand as well. So go out there, get thrifting, and if you want to know some of the brands I found, I'll have the names down below in the description. And with that being said, let's get back to the video. That is a great way to get started with it, just having some good costuming. Something like a cowbell, you can take a regular collar you might already have or buy one for yourself, and you can put a cowbell right on it. You get those on Amazon, feed and tax stores. I mean, frankly, they're probably used as home decor at this point. Just the whole cottagecore aesthetic, right? You can probably find them at Target even these days too if you look for long enough. But cowbells, playing around with that, that auditory way of being a cow. I think expressions, being on all fours and working on things like maybe mooing, for example, and responding in moos to your partner. I'm not expecting anyone to just be able to spontaneously start lactating overnight, though that is certainly a fantasy people have. But if you want to play with that, want to do cow roleplay service, maybe you get totally into your costume, and then maybe you are serving your partner like a cold glass of milk, and you're kneeling next to them and you're pretending it's from you, but really, it's just from the grocery store, right? So I would also think about maybe things that are more focused on the physical service aspect of it, being kind of more that like strong ox, strong cow figure. Maybe you're like helping like lift heavy things, helping out in the garden, doing other things to help around the house too and offer that service. Or it can also just be about the humiliation too. I wouldn't necessarily start doing that right off the bat if you have no experience, but if you already do, I think playing around with like calling your partner a cow and like using it kind of more in like an insulting, derogatory way can be a good entry point. That's more your kink. Or on the opposite of the spectrum, if you really like praise kink, having somebody acting like a cow, making those sounds, acting that way physically, and then like praising them for it, really affirming that they're being a good cow, a good girl, maybe even finding a particular pet name for them as like a very stereotypical like cow name. What would be a stereotypical cow name? Like Bessie, probably? Yeah, just call yourself Bessie and like look in the mirror and like affirm that you are a cow. Or you have a partner, you can play around with them too, obviously like what I was talking about, and then like have them call you by your cow name and then embrace that, see how that feels for a little while. Or it can be as simple as your partner hand feeding you apples from the couch or salad greens. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to run out and get any kind of special equipment. It's about doing things that help you find that particular headspace and get into that zone you want to be in. And there's lots of routes for being able to get there. Most of them do not involve any kind of large expense, especially up front when you're getting started. But I would love to know what you all think about this one in a comment down below. What do you think about cow roleplay or being a HuCow? Is there anything important that I missed? Are you into this kink? Did you learn anything new here? Let me know your thoughts again in a comment down below. If you did enjoy this and are ready, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all different sorts of kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.